Kiera is a psychologist. She's interested in studying why people believe the way they do about the death penalty. She puts together a survey asking people for reasons to support their side of the capital punishment debate. But who should Kiera give the survey to? She wants her research to say something about adults over age 18 in the United States, but it wouldn't be possible for her to give the survey to every American adult. That would take forever. So Kiera needs to develop a sample or group of subjects. This is done through a process called sampling. The goal is to choose a sample that represents the whole population so that Kiera can make inferences about the population from her sample. One major category of sampling techniques is called non-probability sampling. In non-probability sampling, subjects are chosen to be part of the sample in non-random ways. Let's look closer at three non-probability sampling methods: convenience, quota, and judgmental sampling. Okay, so Kiera wants to give her survey to a sample of people in order to learn why Americans feel the way they do about capital punishment. She and her two research assistants go to a shopping mall on a Tuesday morning and stop people to ask their opinion on the death penalty and why they feel that way. Kiera is using the convenience sampling method, which is just what it sounds like. A researcher selects the sample based on convenience. The subjects selected to be part of the study's sample are there and are able to be tested. Convenience sampling has a major problem. The people who are readily available are not necessarily representative of the population at large. Think about Kiera's study. If she and her research assistants poll the people at a shopping mall on a Tuesday morning, their sample is limited to subjects who are at a shopping mall on a Tuesday morning. Anyone with a 9-to-5 job, which includes most adults in America, will be at work, not at the mall, which means that they won't be part of Kiera's sample. That's a problem. With the problem of non-representativeness, you might be wondering why researchers would ever use convenience sampling. The answer is in its name: convenience. Psychologists do this a lot. If they teach at a university, they are most likely doing research on university students. The truth is, it's not always practical to use a method other than convenience sampling. Other sampling methods might yield a better sample, but they also cost more in time and money, so many researchers end up using convenience sampling. For a moment, though, let's say that Kiera and her research assistants are able to go to a mall at a time when the entire population of American adults is represented. She still has to choose which people to survey. How should she do that? One way to choose is to use the quota sampling method, which involves setting quotas based on demographic information, but not randomly selecting subjects for each quota. For example, let's say that Kiera knows that approximately 51% of U.S. adults are women. She might tell her research assistants to interview 51 women and 49 men, a quota that roughly corresponds to the demographics for the population. However, the 51 women and 49 men are not chosen randomly. Her assistants can choose which women and men to give the survey to. The good thing about quota sampling is that the demographics are approximately correct for the population, especially if you make quotas for several different demographic categories. For example, Kiera can set quotas not only for gender, but for race, age, income level, employment status, political party affiliation, or a host of other categories. The more categories there are, the more likely she will have a sample that represents the population. Of course, the more categories she specifies quotas for, the more complex, time-consuming, and costly her study will be. Not to mention the fact that she might not be able to meet all her quotas. So a researcher has to balance having many categories to create a representative sample, with having just a few to keep the research simple and practical. It's a balance that each researcher has to decide on. Okay, so Kiera decides to use quota sampling. She gets a representative sample and looks at why people believe the way they do about the death penalty. But then she decides to follow up with another, related study that looks at the differences in the death penalty by electric chair versus lethal injection. She wants to know what the differences are as far as cost, difficulty of carrying out the execution, and also how the prisoners react to the mode of execution. The problem is that there aren't all that many people who can answer those questions. the best source of her answers would be professionals who have administered both methods of execution. But there are very few of those in the country, so Kiera decides to give the survey to them all. Kiera is utilizing her own judgment as far as who to include in her sample. In this case, she is using the judgmental sampling method, also called the purposive sampling method, which is when the sample is based on the judgment of who the researcher thinks would be best for the sample. You can remember the names of this method because the researcher is using her judgment and picking subjects with a purpose. Judgmental sampling works best when there are a limited number of people with the expertise needed to be part of the sample. In Kiera's case, there are only a relatively small number of people who have administered both the electric chair and lethal injection, so she uses her judgment to choose them as opposed to Joe Schmo on the street who can't answer her questions about cost, difficulty of administration, and how the prisoners react. Non-probability sampling is the method of choosing a study's sample in a non-random way. 3 common techniques of non-probability sampling are convenience sampling, which involves choosing a sample based on the people who are readily available, quota sampling, which requires the researcher to set quotas based on the demographic information of the population, and judgmental or purposive sampling, which involves choosing a sample based on the judgment of the researcher.